Really good at I don't think this is going to work.
It's pretty bad. The hover here, if you don't mind.
So, Mr. Allen, if you come to the front, please. Are you getting volume, Bill? I'll be okay with it. Do you want it or not? If you can do it, it's plugged in now. I don't know if the cord is. Yeah. One of these cords might be bumped, so I could try the other one too. I'll tell you in a second. Yeah. Pardon me? Oh, yeah, I'll get some paper, yeah. Check. It's still good. Don't use it.
Yeah. I completely understand that.
Okay, let's see, we got 2 or 3 candidates.
That one actually might be. Hello?
I know, right? This tech here is kind of ridiculous. This here is kind of ridiculous. Don't reach.
Okay. So I'm gonna get my phone for the other camera.
It's like as soon as Steve said interrupt on that. There we go. Yesterday, and then I'm in that
Can you do that? You can sit there and listen.
You can sit here.
lay down back there.
Right? I'll move my jacket.
If they will, I'll go ahead and jump on the camera. So why don't you do there may be something that's nice as much.
Barber's chairs, like they're gonna spin you around.
Yes, they're done. You're exactly right. That's protocol. Now that we can put it out, I don't have to
what it feels like to be a
That's like without the benefit of the riches.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to put an empty chair in. Okay, Bill, have you invited me yet? All right, thank you everybody for coming down. 15th Ward debate, special election, vacated seats. Jenny, Florida. I'm not the host, but this is my house, so I get to speak. My name is Steve. I'm the tavern keeper here at the Royale. Thank you for coming here to Countercross South, just outside the 15th Ward, but traditionally within the 15th Ward. And we all know with the new expansion, we will be in it almost certainly. If you are live tweeting tonight, we are hashtagging it with number 15, or 15, was it 15TH or 15? Just 15. I think it was 15 with the TH. Yes. Yes, it is. We are also live streaming on. Is it done through YouTube when you watch live stream? Okay, if you go to Hydraulic Pictures on YouTube, it will be archived as well. This is our first time doing this, so my fingers are crossed. It's working well. Bill Streeter from Hydraulic Pictures. We are all friends here in the 15th Ward, so if there's any open seats, just sit there, because we're all friends, we're all neighbors. I see an open seat right there, and if somebody wants to sit here and kind of get the evil eye to any of the candidates, they can do so. And without further ado, I want to introduce Michael Allen, recently released from jail. Just ask him where his new prison tattoo is, okay? All right. I will let Michael take it from here. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, Steve. It's actually a map of the 15th Ward. Totally going to regret that after redistricting. Good evening. It's good to be here. My name is Michael Allen. I'm moderating the debate in part because I don't really have a horse in the race. I'm not a 15th Ward voter, and I have endorsed no candidates. But I do like to ask questions and put people on the spot, so that makes me well suited. I'm an architectural historian by profession, and I have very few political views whatsoever. I just wanted to start, before we get into this, with a few sort of 15th Ward notes, because the 15th Ward has changed its shape and form over the years. Some of you may not know that two of St. Louis's mayors are from the 15th Ward. I'm not suggesting anything for our powerful candidates here tonight, but in the 1960s, Alfonso J. Cervantes was elected mayor as a Democrat after serving in the 15th Ward. However, he lived at 4115 Flora Place, showing that the boundary transcended today's boundary. Another reason for having it at the Royale, we don't know anything around Tower Grove Park could be in the 15th Ward, and after 2023, when we reduce the number, a lot of us from around Tower Grove Park are going to have a common cause and could have the same elected officials, and maybe that person could be one of the three people here tonight. The other mayor was Henry Keel, Republican, elected in the 1920s. Now, Mayor Keel was actually, there was an attempt to recall him from office in 1919, and at that point, the 15th Ward had different boundaries. He would not have resided in today's 15th Ward. The Post-Dispatch reported that the people doing the recall were mostly using the streetcar system to travel around and organize, reporting that most of the 15th Ward residents were strap hangers, users of public transit. So a tradition that maybe some of our candidates will address tonight. Back in 1889, the ward had even different boundaries. It was way far from where it was before we passed the 1914 charter, our current city charter, just turned 100, centenarian tool of government. Its boundaries were roughly 10th or 11th or 12th streets on the east, 18th Street in the west, Wash Street in the north, and Pine Street in the south. So essentially west, middle, downtown into the north side. That changed after 1914 with the new city charter, but it was mostly the areas today we would consider Compton Heights and Fox Park, and that's where Mayor Keel was from. Case in point, in 1921, the alderman from the 15th Ward, Alderman Harry W. Uhlmeyer, was seized by federal prohibition agents for having 200 barrels of illegal booze in his drayage stable. That stable was at 2412 Menard Street in Soulard today. So, another reason to have this fine debate in the 15th Ward here at a public house, perhaps, redeeming the war. So tonight's format is simple. I'm going to ask a yes or no question. Some of them open-ended, some of them very specific to the candidates. Give them about 90 seconds to state yes or no or respond, so you, the voter, know how they're going to handle that issue or that situation. And then at the end of the debate tonight, Steve or Tara Pham here will tell me it's time to get moving and give them a 3-minute closing statement. So that's the format. There will be no questions from the audience, at least formally. You're free to talk to the candidates afterward as much as you like, tweet at them, what have you. You know the hashtag. So I'm going to introduce the candidates, and then we're going to get started. To my immediate left is Rhonda Smythe, running as an independent. To her left is Megan Green, also running as an independent. And to her left is Joshua Simpson, running as a Republican. The Republican is seated farthest to my left. Let's see if that person gets today. Invited tonight was Missy Pinkerton McDaniel, the Democratic nominee. She has not shown up and she's declined participation, so she will not be here tonight. So the first question, starting with Rhonda here and working her way leftward, do you think there is a top priority for the 15th Ward, politically or socially? What is that?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Stevens, for hosting this fabulous event. I wish I could give you some broad, far-reaching idea that the 15th Ward needs, but the fact of the matter is that the 15th Ward at this point doesn't even have a neighborhood association to cover most of the residents in the ward, and so we really have to start at that base level in order to engage residents, increase participation, and make safer streets for our residents. So I've met with the folks on South Grand, I've met with the Tower Grove Heights Neighborhood Association, I've met with the Tower Grove Neighborhood CDC, and we've thrown around a lot of ideas to see how we could best accomplish increased participation in the neighborhood. And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the residents, and the residents are going to decide what kind of format they want. But at the most basic level, we have to have people engaged in the future of our ward. Right now, there's buildings being renovated. We're not seeing any plans for them because there's no formal body for that to happen with.
I would say that the most pressing issue for our ward right now is the retention of young families. So I've been in the neighborhood for about 10 years now. I moved here from upstate New York originally to do something called the Grove Fellows program. And when I moved in, about every couple of houses on my block were under construction. We had the house next to me was boarded up, the house across the street from me was boarded up, and over that time we've seen a tremendous amount of revitalization, and we've seen a tremendous amount of young people who moved into our neighborhood and now have kids. Those families are on the precipice of deciding whether or not to stay, and it is imperative that we keep those families in our ward. So that means we have to look at educational options and opportunities, providing the type of education that our families are looking for so that they have the incentive to stay. That means providing greater supports for families within our neighborhood, family-friendly activities, recognizing that neighborhood association meetings that take place at a 6:30 on a Wednesday night are not convenient for a lot of families who are trying to feed their kids and get them to bed. And providing different opportunities so that families feel like they can be involved and that they do have that community supporting them to stay. And then the last piece of that is crime. We've seen an uptick in crime over the last couple of weeks or last couple of months. And it gives families pause about whether they want to stay in our ward. So we have to address that and keep all of our young families living in the ward.
Thank you, and thank everyone for bringing out in this great St. Louis weather. First, along Megan's line, I believe her priorities were a little different than mine, but the statement is still the same. The safety of our ward is paramount to me. As she said, there's been an uptick. There's been an uptick for several years, I feel like, and with the redistricting of the police stations, the police sections, the way that we're going about this is, I feel, completely wrong. The hotspot monitoring is working whenever it's present, but we need more sustained police presence, and that would make our streets safer. Starting there, once we get that, then we can retain families, we can work on schools. But the fact of the matter is that to start out with, the safety of our people in the ward that are already living there should be paramount and is our #1 priority.
Thank you, candidates. I neglected to point out up front, we do have voter registration in the House. You will not be able to register in time for the October 7th election in the 15th Ward, but you can register in time for November 4th if you haven't done so. I just wanted to call that out. That's sort of a segue to the next question. Given the nature of this special election, we have an unusual situation for city politics in which candidates from the Republican Party and independent candidates are getting as much attention as the Democrat, and oftentimes the Democratic primaries where the action is, and that's certainly the case for most citywide races. Given your participation in this special election, do you think the city should switch to a nonpartisan municipal election system?
I would be in favor of a nonpartisan election, especially at the local level. I am vice president of the 15th Ward Democrats, and it was a bit of a decision for me to decide to run as an independent. But I felt like I was a quality candidate, and I felt like I would be the best person to fill this job. And I had a tremendous amount of support from people within the neighborhood who stepped up and said, this is something that you really need to consider. So I made that choice to go against the party that I have really worked for since even before I could vote. And that was a difficult decision, but I think it was the right one for me. And I think it's the right one for democratic processes. And I think that your party affiliation might matter a lot at a federal level or a state level. When we're looking at a local level like this, where there's really 3 of us who are running as Democrats, or have those democratic values, to me it doesn't really, sorry. It doesn't really matter whether you're an independent, Democrat or Republican, because we see similarly in a lot of the issues.
I didn't mean to take away anything from your speech there. But the fact of the matter is, on a state, a local level, I don't believe that parties really do matter. If it's a good idea, then it should be implemented. I'm not going to lie, my 2 candidates to the right are very well versed in a lot of issues, and would implement a few that would probably do well for our neighborhood. However, I don't think it would ever happen that we would have nonpartisan. I mean, look at the way we're set up right now. I was the 3rd one to register, and is our #2 on the ballot simply because the Democrats are in power in Jefferson City as far as the governor. So I don't believe it will happen. It would be very nice, and ideologically that'd be great. But until something drastic happens, I don't see it ever happening.
So I think a nonpartisan system is definitely something that we should consider, especially in light of the way that the Democratic nomination went for this ward. There was not a process that was laid out for those of us who applied for the Democratic nomination, and therefore we were not told why we did or did not get that Democratic nomination. So incidents like that make me believe that a nonpartisan system could really be a boon for all of us. Last year, I helped start the Civic League Political Action Committee to get more young progressives involved in politics. I obviously had to resign when I started running for office because we didn't know Jennifer was going to resign out of nowhere. But the entire idea was that we need to engage a new sector of the population that had been previously overlooked because people really feel strongly that this is a one-party system. And there's other major cities that have implemented nonpartisan elections, and I don't think that they've really suffered from it. So I would be in favor of taking a deeper look at that.
All right, thank you. The 15th ward has a diverse voter base, like a lot of Southside wards are increasingly diversifying. However, voter turnout across the city varies from cycle to cycle, primary to general election, and it seems like across the city, non-white voters are not being reached, and in Southside wards with immigration in recent years, in the last few decades, that non-white, non-black voters are not even registered necessarily. Are there voters in the 15th ward that aren't being reached, and maybe how would you reach them?
I would definitely say that there are voters not being reached. As far as diversity, I'll touch on that later, but I believe mainly it's because of a lack of participation. Doesn't matter if you're white, black, if you're renting or if you're a homeowner. The fact of the matter is people just aren't getting out. They're not as involved. It's not a welcoming system to bring people into. I believe that community action is the only way we can definitely take a step forward in it, whether it's with the neighborhood associations, becoming more active, getting, having them involved in voter turnout, getting people registered here at a local bar. Whether it's black or white thing, I wouldn't say that. I think it's disenfranchising for everyone, particularly. And so it takes certain people to get out there and really work towards it. And if I was elected, that would be one of my main priorities is increasing just the number of registered voters. We have 11,000 people in our ward and 7,600, I believe, are registered. So just working hard, boots on the ground is basically the first step in getting anyone out there.
For those of you who are at the library forum, I'm going to repeat some of what I said there. The process of running for office and having, in this case, a very limited amount of time to do so means that your strategy has to be to hit as many people as that vote regularly as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, you walk past a lot of houses and a lot of blocks where people aren't voting, which means that you, as the elected official, aren't talking to people who have just as many needs and desires for the neighborhood and the ward as people who regularly vote, and for one reason or another are not currently bought into the system. One of the programs that I want to implement is called participatory budgeting, and it actually engages people in a non-traditional voting process that ties ward funds to people voting. And Christina Ingracia over in the 6th ward, who has endorsed me for this election, she implemented it where they went out and they got people to vote at laundromats and at grocery stores and at the libraries. So they were really going to the voters instead of asking the voters to come to them at a time which may be inconvenient. And they got a 4% participation rate from people who had never participated in the political process before. In addition to that, I think that we have a lot of language barriers in our ward, and I would like to do some of the work that I've done at my time at TrailNet with the International Institute, where you bring translators in so neighbors can talk to neighbors, and folks who may not speak English can speak to the elected officials if we don't have that language ability as well.
I completely agree with Rhonda that participatory budgeting is a must in order to engage populations across our ward that are not currently engaged. By taking the process to the voters, it does make it easier for them to be engaged in the system. Over the years, I've been very involved in voter registration efforts. So back in the 2012 election, I was the volunteer recruiter and manager for Team Tower Grove for the Obama for America campaign. We went to every single door in our ward registering voters. But the problem is people move and they're only engaged during the presidential elections. And so what we need to do is be working on generating the type of excitement we have with this election among every election, so that people are engaged and feel like it does matter to come out and vote. One of the best things about those experiences working with OFA was getting to meet so many diverse people across our ward and people who didn't know that they could vote. So there's a lot of misconception out there that if you have ever been convicted of a felony that you can never vote. And that is not the case. If you are off your papers, you are allowed to vote. But there is that misinformation out there, and it does affect predominantly lower income people within our ward. And so there has to be that education as well as the outreach in order to get people involved in the voting process.
All right, I'll just reiterate what Steve said. Sit where you like. You can also come as close as you like. There's still some room in front. The people who come in, just settle in, be at home. Please don't kick my Oktoberfest. So events in Ferguson have really raised the awareness of people across the region over of the issue of civilian relationship with their police departments. And whereas there are so many police departments in St. Louis County and lots of unincorporated areas, and the question becomes thorny, there is one municipality in the region that has actually, at least legislatively, passed civilian oversight legislation for its police department. The city of St. Louis passed it in 2006. Mayor Francis Slade vetoed the legislation in 2006, stating that the city did not have local control of its department. It was an unconstitutional bill coming from the alderman. We don't know what he would do if that reached his desk now. But in light of Ferguson, this issue seems to have an increasing urgency for a lot of voters. So the question I'm going to ask is, do you support legislation that would create an independent civilian oversight board for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department?
Yes, I support legislation for committee, and I've had an opportunity to talk with some of the folks who helped Alderman Kennedy craft the legislation that will be coming forth before the Board of Aldermen. And I really like the model that they've come up with because it allows citizens to either file a complaint with the Internal Affairs Department or the Oversight Committee. And if they choose to file it with the Internal Affairs Department, the Oversight Committee can still monitor that investigation and subpoena witnesses if necessary. Recently, I was working on a case where a bicyclist was killed in a hit and run by some people who were apparently drag racing down North Sarah Street. And I talked to witnesses who had seen the event, but the police didn't have they were not able to contact the witnesses. So in a case like that, I could see how the Oversight Committee could have some real value in terms of actually putting the criminal there at that point in time. The bill as proposed would give monitoring and investigative power. It would, at the end of the day, the chief would still determine the action to be made. So they would make a recommendation about disciplinary action, but then the power still lies within the chief. Between engaging the public and giving them some power within the police department, but still maintaining the chief's knowledge.
Please speak up.
So I received the endorsement of the St. Louis City Neighbor Club, and in that endorsement, I had one no vote, and that no vote was with the Police Officers Association, and it was because of my belief in a civilian review board. I think it is paramount that we implement a civilian review board to provide that oversight. Even before Ferguson, this issue of trust within the police has been something that has been brewing within the St. Louis community. As a teacher in St. Louis public schools, stop snitching was something that I heard from my students on almost a daily basis. It was a struggle to have my kids understand that the police are there to help you. They are there to protect you. But when they don't see that happening in their own community, it makes it very difficult for them to have that trust. We need the civilian review board because we need to build that trust within our community. Since Ferguson, the issues regarding public trust of the police have been exemplified. it's now part of the mainstream conversation and mainstream dialogue about our police department. And I think if we're to get that trust back so that police can effectively do their job and people will call on the police to do their job, we have to have those checks and balances so that the public feels like there is an association there that really is operating for the public good.
A completely public review board is definitely gonna happen. I mean, it's gonna happen. First of all, there's a public outcry for it. It's in discussion. It's been implemented in several cities across the nation. So, I mean, October 10th, it's gonna be on the floor. So there's not really a discussion about it. The biggest thing that I feel like is the representation on that board. A completely civilian board will be, I feel, because these are being appointed by the aldermen, they're going to make their appointees, and it'll be decided from there. So the fact is, we need people with like a police background or a police union, someone on the board that will actually have a voice for the officers, although it would still give control to the general civilian. I believe that the lack of knowledge is going to be detrimental, and we don't know what happened up in Ferguson. I don't believe anyone here was there, so it's true. You weren't? You were there? Sorry. The thing is, though, that the lack of knowledge is going to be a politically driven mechanism.
Should the city re-enter St. Louis County as a municipality?
I think that is contingent upon a variety of factors. Where we are right now, I don't think we could re-enter tomorrow and have it go as a seamless process. I think it would be a process that would take many, many years of streamlining processes between the county and the city before we could get to that part. One major obstacle we have is that our city charter says that if we do re-enter, we automatically lose that 1% city earnings tax. That is 30% of our budget for operating. That is a big disincentive right now to not re-enter the county, and something that we would have to look at, and something that we would have to figure out different revenue streams for if we were to take that course. I think that we have other options available. We've seen the city and county economic partnership merge together, and so we're starting to look at economic development. It's more of a regional issue than a city versus county issue. I think the more that we can look at how we take those offices that are existing in the county and those services that are existing in the city, and we can streamline those processes, it'll save money for both the city and county and make it easier if we should ever decide to re-enter.
Megan brings up a lot of great points there. The streamlining of processes would be my number one. As of now, though, I completely agree with her. There's no incentive for the county to ratify that. And I believe it's going to have to go to the state in order for that to actually happen. There's just too many varying degrees of ideas and ideologies and everything for that to happen. That's basically what happened in Indiana with Indianapolis with the Unigov. That's the only way they could have it come around, and it actually was a political mechanism more than anything. But it would work, I believe, and I think from there we can work out the individual differences as far as services, streamlining our resources, and all the other intricacies that would be involved in that.
I absolutely think that some form of merger or reunification is going to happen within, I'm hoping, the next 10 years or so. And obviously there's a lot of details to be worked out within that with both the city and the county, but the fact of the matter is we have to stop competing against each other. I mean, it's so ridiculous that we're competing against our next door neighbors instead of, like-minded Midwestern cities who are trying to attract the same residents and families that we are. I have a lot of hope with new leadership in the county that, we'll see some potential changes there because that leadership had been in for quite some time. I currently work with both city and county Department of Health on their obesity prevention initiatives, and our work groups are already talking about how we can merge together and streamline these services that we want to provide to residents. And I truly think that the Department of Health in both the city and the county will be the first to get there, because I think that they are one of the departments that have the most to gain by streamlining resources and reducing the financial burden on both.
I'll follow up with another structural big picture question, and we get back to some more local topics after that. Your prospective predecessor in the 15th Ward, Jennifer Florida, resigned to take appointment to the Recorder of Deeds office. While she was appointed, that's heading to the general election, because it's one of 8 offices called the county offices that the city is required to maintain as an independent city that also has county status. Those are the license collector, recorder of deeds, public administrator, circuit attorney, etc. In most major cities, these offices are appointed or don't exist at all. They're part of other city divisions. 10 years ago, Charter Amendment was making them all appointed. There's a bill potentially at the Board of Aldermen making just the Recorder of Deeds office appointed. My question is, do you think that any of the county offices should be appointed rather than elected? And if so, which ones?
It gets confusing up here sometimes. I don't believe that any of them should be appointed. This is personal belief. I believe it's a democratic process. I believe that anyone who runs should have an equal voice and not be at the whim of whoever's in charge, whether it be city or state, city or county. So my personal preference would be to have general elections for each of the positions.
I do believe that some of the county offices should be appointed rather than elected, specifically those that are just carrying out the duties of a state statute and not affecting local policy. What's happening with the Recorder of Deeds, we are in the middle of a political cycle, so I believe regardless of what happens at the Board of Aldermen, that political cycle needs to be honored, and whoever wins the election fills out that term. But this is one of those positions that could absolutely be grandfathered in to an appointment type basis. This is again just another way that we can streamline local government. In the past 5 years, we've been able to eliminate 2 other county offices that were just carrying out the duties of the state, and they weren't sort of mucking up the political process by having people having to run for them. And another way that we've been able to streamline is with local control of the police. So I'm in favor of anything that makes sense in order for us to streamline our services and efficiencies for the city.
What I'll say is we have 99 problems as a city, and I do not think that this is one. When we are looking at our priorities in terms of what we need to focus on legislatively, passing bills and ordinances passing a bill to eliminate certain positions or make them elected versus appointed, I don't think that's where we should be spending our time at the Board of Aldermen. I think we need to be spending our time looking at the big game-changing policies that need to take place to address crime in our city, to create jobs, to bring more businesses to our city, to continue the revitalization. And I think when we start to engage in discussions like this, we're getting so caught in the weeds that we're not really looking at the big picture of what we need to be doing as legislators to really bring our city to the next level and solve so many of these big issues.
All right. Well, a big picture issue with local ramifications is public education. And one of my first encounters with Alderwoman Florida was on the front lines trying to keep the Board of Education from closing Mann's School. Mann's School was repeatedly threatened with closure, ultimately remaining open. And so just the fate of the building and the chance for a neighborhood school alone, rallied the Alderwoman in this ward. However, again, as someone with very few political viewpoints and limited understanding, it doesn't seem like aldermen really have that much power over the Board of Education or public schools. So my question to all of you is, does an alderman really have power over public education? Maybe you could explain it.
Thank you, audience, for keeping track of who goes first. So we have such a great resource with our neighborhood schools, and I think it's really the future of our ward. If we can get Fanning and Mann to a place where, all of our residents feel comfortable sending their kids, it's going to be the hugest asset that the neighborhood has ever had. My honey and I plan on having kids, and I fully plan on walking my kids to school. So this is a very personal issue to me as well. The local aldermen, for better or for worse, don't have much control over what happens in the school system because so much of it is set at the state level. In my current job, I've actually been hired by the Missouri Foundation for Health to work with schools and communities to implement healthy eating and active living programs and policies outside of school hours because that's what we can affect locally. So I do have experience with things like bringing community gardens to grants, writing grants to get new playground equipment. And I think that these are the kind of things that we can focus on at the local level and be successful in supporting our neighborhood schools.
So I was a teacher in St. Louis public schools, and one of the reasons that I'm running for the Board of Aldermen is because I think that we need that perspective on education down at the board. I am so tired of my friends in our ward deciding to move out of the city because they feel like they do not have good educational options. Rightly or wrongly, that's decisions that people in our ward are making every day. Yes, the Board of Aldermen has very little direct control over the school system, but what we can do is advocate to keep local schools open within our ward. We can help to develop the community systems needed to support those schools and make sure that they are succeeding. We cannot cut $300,000 from St. Louis Public Schools budget that went toward after-school programming for kids, and we can also provide oversight. Most of us know that over the last probably 6 or 7 years now, the mayor has gotten much more involved in education in our city and actually creating a process to bring in charter schools, most from outside Missouri to start up in our city. As the Board of Aldermen, we need to be that legislative checks and balances on that process. And we need to ask those critical questions of the mayor's office when they are bringing in schools like that, so that we make sure that the schools that are starting are meeting the needs of people in our community. Thanks.
That was very well said, Betty. I completely agree. I think you've pretty much nailed it. There's a whole lot that we can do other than advocating and getting our people involved, getting them out, getting them to know, to feel that it's safe to go to school, to have that creating ordinances, to deal with intergovernmental agreements that has happened in the past. So bringing in resources from fire department, things like that. Those are about the only way that that you can do anything with the Board of Aldermen.
Job creation came up, so that's a segue to a few questions. One of them is concerning business permitting and licensing. In the past, the tradition of the Board of Aldermen has been that aldermen have the prerogative to introduce legislation for their wards, creating specific ordinances governing permitting and licensing, especially of taverns or liquor sales, but sometimes for other uses. Small business owners have complained that there's maybe not 28 different standards of permitting, but there's more than one. And that they would have to consult local politics rather than just a city ordinance to open up shops and employ people. Meanwhile, on a lot of bigger projects, larger developers get things passed through that exempt the projects from a lot of local standards. So we can get to that question, but my first question is, should aldermen have to create permit or license specific legislation that just for their wards or parts of their wards, or should there be citywide standards?
I would support citywide standards. With that being said, I think that control needs to be at the ward level in the hands of the people. So I would be in favor of continuing to have hearings on liquor permits. It needs to be up to the residents who are impacted by those businesses to determine if they want a tavern to open up next door, if they want a business that could bring late night traffic. And so I think to that end, the alderman has to be involved at it at a ward level, because our job is to serve our people. It's to serve our constituents. And yes, we need some streamlining of processes across our city. That is a given. But I don't think that the city should be taking any rights away from individual or citizens within our ward to determine what kind of businesses they want to see and what kind they don't.
The city, I believe, should have the strategic planning of business areas, so that there's one continual set precedent across the board. However, taking it individually, it's hard to do that and set one complete standard because of the history that we've had, where people are looking at different areas. The aldermen know the specific areas that they're looking at, what the economic and social impact will be for certain bars or shops, for instance. So the standard should be across the board. However, the alderman still will have an idea of what's going on and be able to work closely with the planning commission to get that involved, to be involved, and to get the appropriate decision made.
So there's a lot of different layers to that question. I'll start out by talking about South Grand, because that was actually a legislative act that created that CID and then gave some funding for full-time staff. And I think that we've all seen and can recognize the amazing improvements that have happened on South Grand that absolutely would not have happened without that legislative process happening. So I do feel like there's value in that with the creation of the district. That said, I know that there's a lot of small businesses who are struggling in our ward, and they're having problems based on who within the city is their building inspector. It's kind of like luck of the draw. Depending on who you get, you'll be able to open your business or not open your business and do certain things with it. So I think that absolutely needs to be addressed within the city agencies. And then, I also agree that the liquor control needs to stay with the neighborhood because it is a neighborhood issue. And I feel like we have great taverns in our neighborhood that at least the residents I've talked to fully appreciate.
All right, I'm going to take a moment to acknowledge some guests. We have the former alderwoman from the 15th, Jennifer Florida, is here with us this evening. We have Alderman Shane Cohn from the 25th Ward. Alderman Scott Blvd from the 24th Ward. Crossing his ward boundaries. And of course, we have the mayor of South St. Louis, Stephen Fitzpatrick Smith. Donna Behringer from the 16th Ward. And if I missed anyone else, I apologize. I think Michael Powers from Louis Reed's office is here too. So a couple of questions in this economic development vein. One that was in the press recently was that in 2012, the Board of Aldermen passed signed an ordinance governing minority participation, but it came to light that with Ballpark Village, very few of the contracts were actually being monitored because St. Louis Development Corporation negotiated them to exempt them from this ordinance, something that the sponsor of the bill, Alderman Terry Kennedy, said was quite a problem. Talking about full employment in a city with an unemployment rate high as ours, it seems like workforce training and workforce inclusion are major goals. This is just one example. There have been criticisms of other major projects. Should the Board of Aldermen take a tougher stance governing minority participation in these contracts?
Yes, I fully agree that the Board of Aldermen should take a tougher stance. The reason that we implement things is that way they can't be, negotiated around. The fact of the matter is that this city is, well over half, about half minority. So the fact is, if they're not represented, then it becomes more of a disenfranchised system that's continuing and is basically becoming the status quo. It's what people expect. It's if you can have a board bill, but then go around it at every other turn, then what's the point of even doing the job? That's the way I look at it. So we definitely should take a harder stance. I believe minority inclusion should be one of the precedents. And if I were elected, that would definitely be one of my most important platforms.
So the way that the ordinance is laid out, they talk about having a good faith opportunity. So the goals are 25% for minority-owned businesses and 5% for women-owned businesses. At TrailNet, we actually sought out to become one of those women-owned businesses because we are 90% female. And the process, which but is excellent, but the process was a little bit more lengthy than something that we wanted to engage in. For specific builders or corporations or government agencies to sidestep laws that the Board of Aldermen has passed is corruption, and it's unacceptable.
I definitely think we need to take a tougher stance on minority participation, but we also need to recognize the challenges associated with that. So I've been a huge or very strong labor supporter. Like I said earlier, I've been endorsed by the St. Louis City Labor Club. I ran the campaign against right to work for the plumbers and pipe fitters this past legislative season, successfully keeping it off the ballot. The trade unions in particular have a very difficult time attracting minorities, and it is a constant battle. And it's one of the things that we've actually been talking about recently is how we can do that. And some of it is through education. We have one trade school in the city right now, Construction and Careers Academy. It's a charter school that focuses on the building trades. We're not offering that level of education or that type of education in most of our high schools at the moment within the city. And so we don't have a pipeline of people to move into those jobs, and it makes achieving those minority numbers difficult at times. And so the trade unions, they recognize that that is a struggle that they have at the moment, and they are looking at ways that we can get around that, and we can build minority participation in the building trades. Education is definitely one of those ways, but I think that we also need to be looking at taking people who are operating as non-union and showing them the benefits of being trained under the union.
Just a few more questions left here. All right, so one of the questions with coming out of this sort of big projects lately has been the Northside Regeneration project. I'm not asking a question about Balmachy and North Side Regeneration. What I am pointing out, though, is that debate over this project the last time around when it went up for tax increment financing engendered commentary and even opposition registered in the form of votes against the bill from aldermen whose wards did not even border the project area. Supporters of the legislation, the aldermen for the area, have for years made the point that it's their ward, their business, their project, but the project drawing upon the largest tax increment financing note the city has ever approved certainly has citywide ramifications, and other people have pointed out this is something that truly affects all of us, good or bad, depending on what happens with this project. This is all just a way to prologue. Should an alderman have an opinion about a development project outside of their ward?
So TIFs are not inherently a bad thing. I think a $390 million TIF is probably a bad thing. And in terms of aldermen across the city being concerned about that the largeness of that TIF, we've never seen that level before. I think it was completely appropriate. I don't believe that aldermanic courtesy, where you step back and you say, I'll just follow your opinion for what you want for your ward. I don't think that's really ever been a good way to go. And I think in the past years, as we've seen new alder people be elected and coming in with a fresh perspective, they're less willing to tie their vote to a person. They are more willing to look at an issue and decide for themselves whether it's going to be the best for their residents and the best for their city, regardless of who is asking them to vote yes or no.
I think there's a time and a place for aldermanic courtesy. So if we go through a traffic study in the 15th ward and find that we need to move some stop signs or we need to redo some of our traffic patterns and pass an ordinance as a result of that, I don't think that an alderman in another ward should be telling me that I can't do that, because that is what my constituents want, and that is what our traffic study for our ward wants. But in the case of Paul McKee's project in North City, that has citywide ramifications. That impacts the 15th ward, even though the project isn't in the 15th ward, because it puts a tax burden on the people of the 15th ward. I think anytime you have a project that is going to be paid for on the backs of the tax dollars, or the taxpayers, on the backs of people across the city, and it affects people without outside of that ward, then I think it's fine to raise up in opposition to that.
Wow, I never thought I'd hear people saying that they were against taxes. So the TIF that we're initially discussing, that I feel, yes, way above and beyond, and we haven't even seen anything come about with it. There hasn't been one shovelful of dirt that's gone out due to that, and they're also getting $50 million from the state. That seems a little excessive. I think that aldermanic courtesy in this case should definitely be overlooked. I think that, you know, there are new and incoming, new progressive type aldermen that are looking towards changing that policy a little bit. However, I don't think that it should have been implemented in the beginning. The typical way that this goes about is not for a traffic study; it's for economic input, and that's never been something that's been, you know, the traffic study has never been something that would be discussed as far as, you know, can't change your stop signs or anything like that. It's always been a courtesy of, you know, you help me, I'll help you. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So that is completely what I'm against. That's what I'm standing up here telling you. That's what my entire platform is. That the status quo needs to go.
All right, back to taxes. Earlier this year, city voters overwhelmingly rejected a statewide sales tax initiative called Amendment 7 that would have raised money for transportation issues. This measure, however, was supported by St. Louis Mayor Francis Slay, who said that the city's priority list was very important and that if we did not pass this tax, we had to figure out other ways to fund these priorities. 15th Ward is a very multimodal ward. I think people use a variety of ways to get around from their feet, to their bicycles, to the bus down here. Amendment 7 seems like a moment to respond, and the question I pose then is, should the city develop a transportation plan? What does that look like?
So I actually helped to work on the No on 7 campaign, and we were very pleased that the voters of 15th Ward came out strong and voted against it. A regressive 1% sales tax to generate $8 billion to not only maintain our existing roadway network, but to expand our highway system, I think was misplaced and inappropriate. So I just want to first thank the voters of the 15th Ward. There's been a lot of transportation plans done. They're just sitting on shelves, not being used. One thing near and dear to my heart is a north-south Metrolink line. We've seen a lot of investment around the central corridor where they've had a Metrolink line come in, and I think the north and south city deserve that same investment. We know that folks across the city want it. We know that it, improves the economic development and that people will come and live by there. I've lost friends in the 15th Ward who have moved to the central corridor so they could only have one car per household or no cars per household. So I think it's imperative that we start to think about this. The voters in St. Louis have already set a precedent for taxing themselves for appropriate transportation. In 2010, we taxed ourselves to maintain our Metrolink bus lines, and then we taxed ourselves twice for walking and biking in St. Louis City to the tune of $24 million to build out a greenway network. So I think that the residents can make a good choice about what we want and what we need in our ward.
I agree that we need a transportation plan for the city. What I will say though is we need to not just look at construction projects, we need to look at maintenance. So I worked about 10 years ago now, right after the 10th of a cent sales tax was passed to create the Greenway District in St. Louis. I worked with Great Rivers Greenway because they suddenly had an issue. They built all of these beautiful greenways and had no money to maintain them. And that is still an issue that we have today. There's been a variety of different mechanisms that GRG has looked at in order to sustain those greenways over the long term. But we have to look at any project we do, regardless of whether it's expanding Metrolink, which I think we have to do for north-south, or expanding bus routes, because 25% of people within the city of St. Louis do not have access to a car, and 90% of those are lower income people. It's not a choice that they're not driving. Bus is often the only way that they have to get from point A to point B, and without having access to good transportation, it can take an hour or two to get to work. And if your job changes, that means that your mode of transportation has to change. It can take even longer for you to get to work. Those are the issues we need to be looking at. We need to do actually region-wide study on our transportation needs and be looking at all facets of transportation, from biking and running to Metrolink and buses and highways.
I said at the beginning, these ladies had some good ideas. They basically said everything that I've thought. The fact is, there needs to be a simple plan. We can't get anywhere. We're looking day to day, not year to year. In my opinion, at least. The thing is, the north-south transportation would be the best idea. It would bring in the people from north that I see every day that can't make it into the job that I hire them for. Lower income to make it into work. So then they're losing jobs. So it's an economic reform, really, is the way I'm looking at it. It would change the dynamic of jobs in the city. People getting to those jobs is the most important. And the fact is that the No on 7, that was a great one as well. I think that you need to tax for what you're using it for. So if you're wanting to redo the roads and you're going to tax on cars, you're going to tax on trucks that are coming through, the ones that are actually making the impact on the streets. I feel that the No on 7 was, great. I'm glad that our people, especially the 15th Ward, came out and voted no on it. And, anytime that a bad tax comes in, that hurts me personally more than anything. So.
All right. More taxes. About 1/3 of the city's revenue comes from a 1% earnings tax on our incomes. We now have the privilege, thanks to Rex Sinkfield, of voting on that every so often at intervals. Some people say this is the tax that keeps our city back. It inhibits our competitiveness against other cities, other parts of the region. Other people, fiscally conservative, say that we can't live without it. Should we retain the 1% earnings tax?
I can't remember. We definitely have to retain the city earnings tax. It is 30% of our budget for the city. It funds the majority of our operations. Without that tax, the city cannot sustain its basic functions. We have to keep that intact. But what we need to do is be looking at ways to overturn this ruling. Yes, this was voted on by the people across the state of Missouri. A lot of them, I think, not necessarily understanding the impact that it would have in cities like St. Louis. We need to be reevaluating that decision and seeing what we can do legislatively to change that, to undo that constitutional amendment, so that we're not having to vote on this and go through this re-education process every 10 years and turn out the votes to make sure that we keep this tax and we keep 30% of our revenue for a city.
Well, I definitely believe in the earnings tax. It's, I feel, the most fair and unbiased of all the taxes. It's across the board. If you're making money, you're giving 1% to the city to help out. I don't think that it's economically it makes sense to get rid of it, and the city of St. Louis decided that too. I mean, it's been around since 1954, and it had overwhelming support in 2011. Sure, there might be people that are unaware, and so we need to re-educate every time, but the fact of the matter is that if that small step is all it takes to continue to have this earnings tax, then I'll be the first one out there with it.
I do support retention of the earnings tax. As mentioned, it's about 30% of our city budget. And I think it's one of the fairer forms of taxes we have, because if you're retired and not working, then you're not paying into the system. There's a direct correlation between the amount of money you're making and the amount of money you're paying in. So I think it makes far more sense than regressive sales tax. It's coming up again in 2016, and a lot of time and dollars and volunteer hours will have to put in yet again to ensure that we have the success rate that we had in 2011 of 88%. But I know you guys will all do the right thing.
All right. Coming down to the wire here. So a citywide issue that is important to some people, and probably to 15th Ward voters, is the sort of urban character of the city, the density and form of the building stock. And the 15th Ward is a great example of what beautiful, walkable urbanism looks like. However, the city is operating under a zoning ordinance from the 1950s, and it requires a variance to build anything that looks like a commercial building on Morgan Ford or South Grand, or a beautiful house on Hartford or Potomac Street. So some people have proposed a form-based zoning code that looks at urban form and remedies this older piece of legislation. Other people would say that the city is still in a position to take what it can get, that we are starving for economic development, and that putting more inhibitions on developers and more rules on them will keep projects out, and they'll go to the county or go to some other city. Do you support overhauling our zoning ordinance with a form-based code?
I do support it. As we all spoke about, I believe at the last forum, the beauty of St. Louis is really what kept me here after graduating from St. Louis University in 2008. While my friends, a lot were leaving for Chicago, Denver, San Antonio, other opportunities, the fact is St. Louis, the people, the cultures, that's what kept me here. That definitely shows up in the architecture. That shows up in so many ways around the city. So I personally think that, yes, revamping so that way we have a plan for the future, that, whether it's form-based or whatever's decided by the people, with input from your elected officials, should be the best decision. The form-based definitely is a better way than the zoning. Zoning, you got to go street by street, and form-based, you at least have a plan. So the idea that of overhauling would definitely be my recommendation. Yes.
So to be clear, we do have a form-based code zoning overlay that aldermen can choose to put on their wards. I helped work advocating for this back when I was doing the Good Ideas for Cities project in 2012 and 2013. And what we were told by the city at that time was it will take $1 to $2 million to throw out our zoning code and start from scratch. And we just don't have that money right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to patch it, which is not perfect, but at least provides the wards with, some opportunity to build people-based infrastructure. I think that, the character is what draws people in, and the character of the city is what keeps people here. And when we do things like, build a Rite Aid or a Walmart with a parking lot in front, so the parking lot is what's, facing the sidewalk, that's not very welcoming. What we want is buildings that are at street level and at people. It feels like a nice, welcoming, character-filled business district that can play and work like that.
Thank you for taking my picture. What I will say is, form-based makes a lot is that it allows the people to control active on it and have a vision say in all the end result is of economic development or therefore it allows participation into the community and realize that arson challenges and causes in which people for zoning codes, but in the end, it's mainly more cohesive, we as a community could building the type of infrastructure, the type of utilities that we want to see, form-based seeking. You see the development types of businesses, these types of infrastructures to structure that to support that vision that your community. But another piece is an action to go in addition issues. We have big abortions and have properties and go damage and go about that is the tenant bill of rights. We talked about this a lot at the forum on Monday. Bill of rights, the tenant bill of rights lays expectation and expectation for a landlord and rental agreement and a rental agreement. So if you're keeping up that you know exactly what these you know and talking we're using the substitute resources and less to get that growth.
A citywide question, according to student services, homeless enough now, in the city. Earlier this year, the first early homeless tribe individuals might be some 100 people. At the same time, obvious 10 years of pension reminding us that the homeless issue will be living. Maybe I'm not doing not much. So my is the city recognizing now also address follow up with doing the right thing.
Mayor Slay, and County Executive Charlie Dooley wrote the 10-year plan to end. So while I applaud the decrease, we're headed the plan to have 100%. So we said this is another area we can understand and see what they've done since father and the process that Serbia is vetted or population that they realize now they can probably implementing the process for services in Seattle the library it has facilities, it has showers, and people access it, so I think use them. So they use feels good individuals now today and see other cities and bring these to bring things.
So the plan is actually in your relation and your things on it, not homelessness. And so in that regard, so many great strides for the meeting. Some people spend 6 months or more without permit. And so that means that they could be shortly out for our unbelief or they were not lost permit or they have some period. I worked in an organization called Low House, Mutual Low House. I work exclusively with women with mental illness, with mental illness, have a tendency less. And while we were there, we piloted a program, keep people less. Do not have the support. Are never going to be able to be housed. They have this. They have for us to keep the supports to keep them in person housing. They have that social worker that's checking in on them daily and every sure that they're taking their medicine, So because we've been able to brainstorm these lots of things, housing Tuesdays to a complete dramatically not to that end though. To the extent though, we still have and that's a funding issue, we're on the issue of the programs nationally that are being looked at in the way that we address the way that we have caused chronically homeless people.
This report under reporting we are considering great strides though. There are sides those where city has the prevention, the transitional support, different ways of we should continue and with that the getting grant looking at the way that we homeless pursue in the fact the middle is issues of rampant issue. So the way we look at that is more concern. It's a concern process is left to the main discussions in other stations, but other cities with us having this having that plan already in place in 2005, 2006. We have cities with the thing with Smythe is that it's not that it's factless is the place that it's the issue and and criminal activities that
More questions. All right. So there are several public boards and commissions in the city. The Board of Health Practice already deal with. There are other commissions like the Planning Commission, the Airport Issue Short Preservation Mayor, where the mayor holds the majority or some majority of policies. People criticize them and still saying look a lot like the city and they're in the middle of 5 nails. Why the female technician. One was ratified suggestions that the alderman should directly support. They also already have the power to ratify. My question is, should the Board of Aldermen take a more involved approach in the appointments to these commissions?
I agree that we have to. I agree that we have to take more involvement, to city. Obviously is an issue that we have a wonderfully diverse needs. We have to make sure that our government organizations represent the diversity. We're not doing our job for aldermen if we're just pointing out any serious setting and without looking at make up all those committees or looking at those committees. We still look at the statewide is a statewide governor, council, all being appointed for. And the second is attention of presentation. Really make attention, really making it shift in that. I think that the majority of that, the majority of teaching for station is very good in the state of Missouri. It's being administrative people at every other level. And those are things that we're calling them as the resumption of those make organizations and organizations and make sure actually represent the city of St. Louis.
I completely agree. Stan needs to maybe said before, the city is more than half made up. It's they had a stand, number one, and very paramount. We represent the people, so they represent all their representatives. Not build the city. If you don't have representation of the majority officials, and the only thing we can do is in there, hopefully, or that they can stand up and say that we've got political faults and rules of arbitrariness and thing. It's definitely a certain and better and for, as I said, it just as well status to the over and over again. That's my stance. That's my stance. I know it's the fact on it is the fact. It's just happening year after year. If you want to see the influence, you have to stand up, and I will stand up. I will tell the mayor that it's hiding. There's a and it should not, and we should not let these people be our representatives.
One of the works on the policy. I a lot of rooms and a lot of meetings with a lot of many people but it's really disheartening and anytime you feel like your voice isn't as important. The larger issue, I think this comes back. And the need for this and the need to start because we need and what we tell me and it's something that is when we have you when people in power for decades that we get more of this government form of government we need to provide these people and having term level and going term level is real our positions for people like to roll up the office to run over office especially the underlying issue here.
Thank you for answering all these questions. Recording. No pressure. The candidates control 30 seconds, so maybe
maybe not just to say that already. That already.
Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. I just wanted to come out and bring that through political views or anything. I feel everyone feels accepted. It's not very much too much for thinkers and more than what it's budgeting. I believe that was already being released, and so that's what I was planning to help people in this planning beginning of the board. The planning board six, these there, any other applications. This already have actually in place in the state of Missouri to give the things rights. I've been Google search, the board the paint but there are several both two ranks, and I would be with that. Our number one priority, our number one priority, safety of people and research for military police, also safety has been the state is and the fact is safety has been practicing automatic staying away from the status quo. It's really where I'm at. I can understand if you if you and agree with it, that's fine. I can understand. I absolutely understand that position. Fact is, but as far as it goes, very that's hopefully would it's elected, we hope to do that. But I do feel that I'm trying to use those things. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for coming out. Let's break this around. Let's talk this Mr. Smith-Beer. Let's see you to the list for putting this all together. That's wonderful. Having our people that was having our presentation, really candidates for coming out and participating tonight so that you all can make an educated decision. I know that there are a lot of similarities in who candidates are, and I think as representative of this local having this, we all want to live in this. We all want to live in this. We all want we also want to have that fun to have such local methods to get our coffee or to get our cars either table falafel from the booth. So I don't think that we really got hurt in any of the picture and any career and I absolutely appreciate both taking into Josh's experience and Josh's I believe that mine has to do more appropriate working I've been working with folks for several years. Started the political action committee to get me thought that this wasn't working. I am committed to getting this done, to getting this in my work in Carolina. I've had a policy. I budgeted this meeting every meeting last week. Volunteer as a record. So I really tied all of this charts to Carlos and this works in other cities. So I have no doubt. I have no doubt that I would be able to hit the ground running and the active ward, nowhere else I would like to live. And I know that we only have opportunity to have opportunities, and all of it's going to take to your help because doesn't that things change overnight. Electing one person being helped and ultimately involved in enforcement and the word is what's going to rise this all up in the end.
I moved in South Tower 10 years ago, 10 years after, and eventually became home. During that time, revitalization, we still have troubleshoots relating to properties that have not been upheld and relating to quality the second look at those issues, big issues that matter to our board. Stick salary is sort of and that person is worked within the school system. I know how it operates. I know what our challenges. When we're talking about interculturalizing diverse populations in our ward, we worked for 3 years to start with locked school mayor's office. They were parents with the educator board in our ward. School started every school so frustrated, so many obstacles that we face. As a volunteer recruiter for Obama, I was able to connect a volunteers mobilized to mobilize to make sure that Barack Obama was elected our president again. We're moving away from college Democrats, and when the Kerry campaign to Pennsylvania, the campaign to Pennsylvania, organized the largest campus is campus history. 89% of our turn election vote on election. If CBS reason that Pennsylvania was because of the under 25 vote. I have mobilized and engaged in every person, and I have worked for so many diverse populations. Know how accept it by the challenge. I know the challenges we face homelessness. I know the challenge. I know the challenges we face economic disparity and racial disparity within our disparity and the problems that I've been dealing with for 10 years. I will bring that experience down to the I will bring that informed decision making to make sure that we are all diverse of our need for and implementing things that are participating, like form-based learning, age warranty, and we're going to make us a world where everyone to live, stay, and thank you so much for this opportunity, and I appreciate it.
How many right here. How many of you drink a lot? Bringing together, making official, wonderful, beautiful, wonderful, and for your everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry about this. First time doing this. First time doing the audio. Did it get better at any point?